Stop playing with her like she ain't pressure. See, you got too comfortable. And you think don't...
Doing right now, bitch, just bend over and start.
On the morning of October 25th, 2023, in Dallas, Texas, the body of a woman was found on the side of the road, near the intersection of Melinda Lane and Murdock Road. She'd been shot in the chest. The victim was 35-year-old Dishaye Stevenson. Dishaye was a successful entrepreneur, a wife, and a mother, all at once. In the most literal sense, she was the one holding the family together. For years, she paid the bills, ran her own business, took care of the people she loved, and fully supported her husband, 39-year-old Michael Smith, who hadn't had a steady income in years. And it was that same man, the one she fed, supported, and carried on her back for years, who ended her life with a single gunshot.
Stop playing with her like she ain't pressure. I don't know what make you think you can treat her how you been treating her.
What goes through the mind of a man who's been living off his wife for years in the moment he decides to raise his hand against her? What had to happen for gratitude to turn into a bullet? That's what we're breaking down in this video. Dishaye Stevenson was born on November 16th, 1988, in Dallas, Texas. Her parents were Jeanette Stevenson and Chris Rosebud. To the people who knew her, she went by two nicknames, Shay Money and Just Shay. She graduated from Grady Spruce High School in Dallas, and while she was still young, she found her Christian faith at New Testament House of Prayer under Pastor Don Klein. Family remembered her as vibrant and outgoing, someone who drew people in and was almost always the life of the room. In school, she was a standout track athlete who also played soccer and basketball. Sports mattered to her long before business and family took over as her focus. She wasn't an only child. She had a brother, Jeremiah, and two sisters, Jasmine and Gavanna. Relatives describe her as someone people naturally gravitated toward. She knew how to keep a conversation going, how to make people laugh, how to show up exactly when she was needed. That trait, giving attention and warmth to other people without expecting anything in return, would later become one of the defining details of her story. Not as a daughter or a sister, but as a wife. As she got older, Dishaye built a name for herself as an entrepreneur. In 2021, she launched her own bag and accessories brand, Shay Money Purses and more, putting her own time, money, and energy into it. She built the brand herself, grew its presence on social media herself, and talked to customers personally. For her, this wasn't just a way to make money. It was something she took pride in, something that had become part of who she was. Alongside that, she worked as a tax preparer, helping clients with their filings. In other words, she had two separate income streams, and she supported herself entirely on her own. By this point, she was also caring for her 16-year-old daughter and her mother, who had been partially paralyzed by a stroke, arranging her treatment, monitoring her condition, and handling the full weight of her day-to-day care. Dishaye was juggling the roles of entrepreneur, sole breadwinner, mother, and caregiver all at once, and according to family, she did it without a single complaint, all while staying the same upbeat person her friends and family had always known. Much less is known about Michael Smith's early life. By the time he turned 39, he already had a criminal record and had served a 5-year prison sentence. What exactly he'd been convicted of isn't specified in the public record. It's known that he'd struggled with drug addiction in the past, and that shortly before the tragedy, by the available account, he'd relapsed. He never held steady work or had a reliable income, either before prison or after his release. Coming back from prison to ordinary life is, for a lot of people with a record, a genuinely hard process. Hard to find work, hard to rebuild any kind of financial independence, hard to feel any sense of control over your own life again after years spent on somebody else's schedule. How much of that weighed on Michael is unknown, but in all the years after his release, he never managed, or never chose, to become anything other than a man who depended entirely on his wife's income. It was right after Michael's release that the part of the story his family talks about today really begins. While he served his 5-year sentence, Dishaye stayed loyal and waited for him. For years, with no guarantees, with no idea what kind of man would walk out or what would be left of their relationship by the time he did. On his release day, she drove there herself and picked him up. She didn't just wait around for him to find his own way home. From that point on, she started pouring almost everything she earned into him. She paid for a lavish wedding. She bought both of their wedding rings. She took on every recurring bill the household had, from utilities to everyday expenses. About a year before the murder, she gave Michael $10,000 in cash as a birthday gift. Michael, for his part, never carried any financial responsibility for the family, not before his time in prison and not after. Dishaye stayed the household's sole breadwinner for all those years. And by every account, she seemed to see that role as simply part of loving a man she kept believing in. In public, the couple looked picture perfect. Relatives, without exception, described Michael as sweet whenever family was around. Charming, easy to talk to, someone who knew how to win people over and come across as a caring husband. But according to those same relatives, behind closed doors, he became a completely different person. The family didn't catch that contrast between his public image and what was actually happening inside the marriage right away, and they didn't grasp the full scale of it until it was already too late. That gap between a charming public mask and a hidden set of behaviors inside the relationship is a pattern that's well known to people who work in domestic violence. Outwardly, a charming man who wins over his partner's friends and family. Behind the front door, an entirely different set of rules, known only to the two of them. Dishaye's sister, Jasmine, later recalled that there were videos saved on Dishaye's social media where Michael openly bragged about smoking PCP, marijuana, and other substances. In other words, Dishaye knew about her husband's addiction. It wasn't a secret to her. She knew, and she stayed anyway. She kept paying the bills.
See, you got too comfortable. And you think don't nobody want her, you the only one that want her, no matter how you treat her.
She kept, in Jasmine's words, doing everything she could to show him she loved him, no matter what. Dishaye's days during these years were built almost entirely around other people's needs. Mornings might start with helping her mother, the care routines needed by someone who'd partially lost her mobility to a stroke. Afternoons went to tax clients and to growing her bag brand, which demanded constant attention, from shipments to customer service. Evenings went to a teenage daughter, ordinary parenting stacked on top of the fact that Dishaye was the only truly stable adult in that household. Michael barely factored into any of it. By every account from people close to the family, the entire load, financial and logistical both, fell on Dishaye alone. It's worth pausing here to ask a question no source on this case answers directly. What was actually happening inside this marriage in the final months before the murder? Jasmine Stevenson told reporters there were a lot of red flags in her sister's relationship, warning signs pointing to an unhealthy dynamic, but she never specified what those signals actually were, and the TV stations that interviewed her couldn't get her to go further. It's reasonable to guess she meant outbursts of anger, attempts at control, moments when the sweet guy mask slipped, not just behind closed doors but in front of family too. That's a guess built on the overall picture though, not on direct evidence. Another question follows naturally. Why did Dishaye herself, knowing about her husband's addiction, seeing his behavior, hearing the warning signs about him, stay in this relationship and keep investing her money, time, and herself into it? There's no clean answer to that either. One possibility is that her faith played a role, the same faith she'd found as a teenager, the belief that a person can be saved, that love can pull someone out of addiction and irresponsibility. Another possibility is that after so many years of waiting, after so much invested effort, she simply wasn't ready to admit that all of it had been for nothing. Neither explanation rules out the other. They could easily have both been true at the same time. A different thread runs through this story much more clearly. A thread of growing imbalance. Year after year, Dishaye grew more successful. Her business expanded. Her name as an entrepreneur started carrying real weight, and she was supporting not just herself, but her husband, her daughter, and her mother. Michael stayed exactly where he'd started. No job, no income, completely dependent on his wife financially. According to relatives, it was against that backdrop that resentment toward Dishaye's success started building in him. A man who'd spent years living off his partner watched her become more independent and more accomplished by the day. And by every account, that wasn't easy for him to sit with. The gap in standing between the two people in this marriage grew more visible to everyone around him as time went on. Dishaye showed up at events tied to her business, negotiated with clients, planned out where her brand was headed. She was moving forward, building her own standing in the eyes of her community. Michael stayed outside that part of her life entirely, contributing nothing to it beyond it seems a growing frustration that his wife felt more and more confident without him. Financial dependence in relationships like this often turns into a source of quiet humiliation for the partner who depends, and that kind of humiliation can build for years with no outlet, right up until something comes along that's enough to bring the whole structure down at once. At some point, by all appearances, Dishaye simply got tired. tired of giving without getting anything back, tired of being the only support in a relationship where the other person had spent years never even trying to meet her halfway.
I don't know what make you think you can treat her how you been treating her. But that woman right there, oh, that's some pressure, baby.
By the available account, shortly before the murder, she told Michael she wanted to end things and file for divorce. This wasn't a snap decision made in the heat of one fight. It was the statement of someone who had carried another person's entire life on her shoulders for years and had finally decided to put it down. For Dishaye, that decision was likely the result of a long internal process, one where patience gradually gave way to the realization that pouring anything more into this relationship wasn't going to change a thing. For Michael, entirely dependent on his wife financially, a decision like that meant more than the end of a marriage as an emotional bond. It meant the end of an entire way of life he'd built around someone else's income, someone else's home, someone else's care, a way of life where he never had to answer for anything. Divorce for him potentially meant not just losing a partner, but losing a roof over his head, his financial support, and the status of being husband to a successful woman, a status he'd apparently come to take for granted. Whether the threat of divorce was the sole cause of what came next, or whether it was a combination of factors, a relapsed addiction, wounded pride, the fear of being left with no support and no way to survive on his own, can't be said with full certainty. None of the available sources give a complete picture of what was going on in his head in those days. But it was around this one decision of Dishaye's, the decision to leave, that the final hours of her life began to unfold. Hours that would turn out to be fatal. Before we go further, if this case has you locked in, hit like. It tells us stories like this need to be told. Subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation. And drop a comment. What's your read on this case so far? Now, back to the timeline. On the evening of Tuesday, October 24th, 2023, Michael Smith asked Dishaye to meet him in the parking lot of the Pleasant Village Apartments, where his father, Dishaye's father-in-law, lived. The exact time of that request, and how it was communicated, whether by phone, in person, or some other way, isn't documented anywhere in the available case materials. What is known is that Dishaye agreed and drove to the meeting in her own car. The choice of location is worth noting on its own. Not the apartment the couple shared, not some neutral public place, the parking lot of the building where Michael's father lived. Why a conversation about the future of their marriage had to happen there instead of at home is a question neither investigators nor Dishaye's family have ever publicly answered. It's possible the location was simply practical. Michael, in those days, appears to have been splitting time between two addresses, moving between the home he shared with his wife and his father's place, and the apartment complex parking lot may have just been the closest available spot to him that evening. There's no direct confirmation in the case file either way. Surveillance cameras at the complex captured the couple pulling into the parking lot in two separate cars. Dishaye in hers, Michael in his. After the murder, this detail that they arrived separately to the same meeting became one of the first pieces investigators were able to reconstruct from the footage, even before they knew anything about what had actually been said between the two of them. The footage shows Dishaye stepping out of her own car and getting into Michael's. That decision, moving onto his territory, putting herself inside the closed space of his car instead of talking outside in view of the cameras and any passers-by, would later become one of the most discussed details in the entire case. In that moment, she didn't know how the night would end. She only knew what she'd known about her husband for years. His temper behind closed doors, his addiction, the gap between how he acted in public and how he acted at home. And she got into his car anyway. Was it a habit built over years together? A sense that she'd been through the worst before and made it through? Or simply no alternative in the moment? There's no way to know. The cameras capture the picture, but not the sound. Investigators have no audio of what was actually said inside that car in the minutes that followed. Only an account pieced together from indirect evidence. The car stayed parked there for a while. How long exactly? Sources don't specify. It could have been a few minutes. It could have been much longer. Based on the footage, there appears to have been some kind of struggle inside the car. Movement that looks like conflict, like one person trying to hold the other back or stop them. What was physically happening inside that car in those minutes can't be established from video alone. The camera captures motion, but it can't capture words, and it can't tell you who was doing what to whom at any given moment. This is one of those pieces of the case where the documentation exists, but the understanding doesn't. According to investigators, at some point during that conversation, Michael asked Dishaye directly whether she was actually going to leave him.
If that Don't come on money, I can't lay with it. He call me baby, so it's 200 a K with it.
She said yes. That reconstruction comes from investigative materials, and it isn't backed by any independent recording or witness account from inside the car. The only two people in that conversation were the two of them, and one of them will never get to tell their side. By the available account, at the time all this was happening, Michael was allegedly under the influence of PCP. There's no official lab confirmation of that in the public record. Every mention of it comes with the word allegedly attached. Still, if it's accurate, it would help explain how sharply and how fast the conflict escalated. From a conversation about divorce to a fatal gunshot, it looks like only minutes passed. Was that shot the result of a cold, premeditated decision, or a last-second impulse from a man who'd lost control of himself under the influence of a drug and years of built-up resentment? That's a question the open case materials don't answer. Both explanations find some support in the known facts, in favor of some degree of calculation. The choice of an isolated spot near the cemetery, which Michael drove towards only after getting Dishaye's answer about the divorce, meaning the decision about where to go came only after the conflict had already reached its breaking point. In favor of a spontaneous outburst, everything Michael did after the shot showed no real logic of covering his tracks. He didn't get rid of the car. He didn't change his clothes. He didn't leave the places he normally went. Maybe both are true at once. The decision to drive somewhere out of sight was rational, and the shot itself wasn't. After the conversation in the car, Michael drove out of the apartment complex and headed toward Lincoln Memorial Cemetery in southeast Dallas. No witness to the shooting itself appears anywhere in the open case materials. At that hour, on an empty stretch of road near the cemetery, there don't seem to have been any passers-by or other cars around, at least none that any known source mentioned seeing or hearing what happened. The only witnesses were the two people inside that car. There, Michael fired one shot into her chest, point blank, at close enough range that the gap between the muzzle and her body was minimal, a detail that would later matter for how the act got classified. Not an accidental discharge during a scuffle, where the gun could have simply gone off. A precise, aimed shot. One was enough. It struck her chest, a spot that left her almost no chance. Dishaye didn't get a second to defend herself, call for help, or try to get out of the car. After the shot, Michael made no attempt to call for help. Instead, he pulled her body out of the car and left it on the side of the road, where strangers with no connection to her or her family would find it hours later. Michael himself turned the car around and drove away, back to the home he and Dishaye had once shared as husband and wife, a home largely paid for by her. He didn't flee, he didn't leave town, he didn't try to dispose of evidence anywhere outside his normal routine. He went back to the place where he'd lived for years off the earnings of the woman he'd just killed, and spent the rest of the night there like nothing had happened. There's something chilling in that ordinariness, in the fact that a man who had just taken his wife's life drove not into the unknown, but home, into his own bed, into his normal nightly routine. Not a panicked flight, a return to routine. Dishaye's body stayed on the side of the road for the rest of the night. No one who knew and loved her suspected a thing yet. Exactly who spotted the body and called police in the morning, a passing driver as the light came up, or a local resident, isn't specified anywhere in the open case materials. Only the time of the call itself is known. On Wednesday morning, October 25th, 2023, around 7:20 a.m. When Sametway Dallas police got a call about a shooting in the 1600 block of Murdock Road. Some early reports listed the shooting itself as happening on the 25th, but based on the materials underlying this case, the murder actually happened the evening before, and the discovery of the body and the call to police came the following morning. That's a discrepancy worth keeping in mind with any source you come across on this case. The officers who arrived on scene found 35-year-old Dishaye Stevenson shot on the side of the road at the intersection of Melinda Lane and Murdock Road in southeast Dallas, not far from Interstate 20. Dishaye Stevenson died at the scene. The paramedics who arrived with police pronounced her dead. There was nothing left that could be done. While Dishaye's body still sat undiscovered on the roadside, anxiety was already building inside her family. On the evening of Tuesday, October 24th, Dishaye's 16-year-old daughter, Jemiah, called relatives to say she couldn't reach her mother. For someone directly responsible for two people who depended on her, a teenager and a partially paralyzed mother, that kind of silence was unthinkable under normal circumstances. That phone call became the first sign that something had gone seriously wrong. No texts, no warning about running late. Not a single word about where she was headed after meeting her husband. Dishaye had simply stopped responding, and to anyone who knew her routine, that silence said everything, even before there were any concrete facts to go on. The family didn't wait for morning, and they didn't go straight to the police. They started searching for Dishaye themselves. Dishaye's sister, Jasmine, called their cousin Anita, and the two of them set out to figure out where Dishaye might be. No official search had been launched at this point. This was two women, armed with nothing but their phones and their fear. In situations like this, time is often measured in hours, sometimes minutes, and the fact that this search effectively began not with a police report, but with two relatives mapping out a route in the dark on their own, says something about how fast the family understood. This wasn't an ordinary delay. Something serious had happened to Dishaye. Using her phone's location, they managed to track Dishaye's car, and the signal led straight to Pleasant Village Apartments, the same place her last trip had started the evening before. For Jasmine and Anita, this was their first real lead. That was where, outside her father-in-law's building, Dishaye's last known trail went cold. What was actually going through Jasmine and Anita's minds in those minutes, while the car carried them toward Pleasant Village Apartments, isn't something any source records directly. Once there, Anita, a criminal justice student, noticed a large handprint on the driver's side window of Dishaye's car. Her training seems to have kicked in, less as a formality and more as an actual practical skill. Instead of just looking at what she'd found, she started searching, in her own words, for context clues, the kind of details that together might explain what had happened. That it was her, and not someone else in the family, who caught this detail probably wasn't a coincidence. The eye of someone trained to read a scene works differently from the eye of someone gripped by panic and hoping for the best. That handprint would later become one of the details investigators kept coming back to. While Jasmine and Anita were trying to figure out what to do next, a post went up on a local community blog. Somewhere nearby, about a 3-minute drive from where they were standing, a woman had been shot to death. 3 minutes isn't an abstract figure. It's the next street over, part of the same neighborhood the two women had just spent the last hour searching. Reading that post, Jasmine and Anita, by all appearances, already knew where they needed to go, even if they were probably still hoping it was someone else. Local community blogs like this one often get information out faster than official channels do. Faster than a story makes it into a police log or onto the evening news. And in this case, that speed mattered. The family learned about the woman found dead hours before it became official news for the wider public. They drove to the location and got confirmation from police of what they'd been dreading all evening. The woman shot and found on the side of the road was Dishaye. The moment relatives learn about a loved one's death from an officer standing at the scene is one nothing can prepare you for, no matter how many anxious hours came before it. By that point, Jasmine and Anita likely had few real doubts left about the worst outcome. But there's a difference between suspecting something and hearing it confirmed by someone in uniform. Meanwhile, Michael Smith himself was acting, after it all happened, like nothing had occurred. He went back to the home he'd shared with his wife and stayed there. When police, who'd already identified their suspect, showed up at that address, they found his car parked in the driveway, and through the window alone, without even opening the door, they could see blood on the front seat. That was enough to instantly turn what had been a search for a person of interest into a heightened threat operation. For the officers standing in that driveway that morning, what they saw through the glass left little room for alternate explanations. This was the car of a man they needed to bring in fast, and possibly a man who was armed and dangerous. Dallas police sent a tactical team to Smith's house in the Creek Cove neighborhood. A SWAT unit took up positions around the building. Based on footage from the scene, somewhat the case of the secrets of MSB, this was a serious full-scale operation, built around the possibility that the man already suspected of murdering his own wife hours earlier might resist by force. Officers in tactical gear, a perimeter thrown around a residential home, everyone waiting on the order to move in. The standard picture for taking down an armed, potentially dangerous suspect. But Smith wasn't in the house. While SWAT held its positions around the building, he was just a few minutes walk away, sitting calmly in a nearby barbershop getting a haircut. That contrast, an armed SWAT team preparing to storm a house, and a man, at that exact moment, sitting in a barber's chair, became one of the most talked about details in the entire case, repeated later across dozens of articles and social media videos. What was actually going on in his head during those hours? Whether it was an attempt to build himself an alibi through sheer ordinariness, a total failure to grasp how serious the situation was, or the actions of a man still high enough to not fully register what he'd done, remains a matter of speculation. Police tracked down his location fairly quickly and found Smith right there at the barbershop. A bystander caught the moment of his arrest on a cell phone camera, footage that later spread across many of the outlets covering the case. In that footage, you can see a man who, just hours earlier, was suspected of calmly and coldly killing his own wife, and who, at the moment of his arrest, looked as unremarkable as anyone would look being told by police to stop and not resist. No struggle, no chase, no drama. An ordinary arrest of an ordinary-looking man in the middle of an ordinary workday at a barbershop he'd walked into for a haircut just hours after killing his wife. Michael Smith was arrested that same day, October 25th, 2023, and charged with murder. Less than 24 hours passed between the moment Dishaye got into his car in that parking lot and the moment he was taken into custody in a barber's chair. There was no attempt to flee at any point. The man who had taken his wife's life spent the next several hours literally within walking distance of the crime scene, going about an ordinary day. For Dishaye's family, the hours between her disappearance and confirmation of the worst became a stretch of time that would later be almost impossible to recall in detail. While Michael Smith sat calmly in a barber's chair, two women from Dishaye's family were driving those same neighborhood streets, searching for an answer to a question that by Wednesday morning had already been answered in the worst way possible. After Michael Smith's arrest, investigators moved on to organizing everything they'd collected over the preceding hours, and the picture that came together at this point turned out to be far more complete than what the search had started with the night before. The search of Smith's car, found in his driveway, gave investigators several key findings right away. Beyond the blood on the front seat, which officers had already spotted through the window, a closer inspection turned up a spent shell casing sitting on the driver's seat in what appeared to be the exact spot where the shot itself was fired. Investigators also found a single sandal in the car, later confirmed to match the one Dishaye had been wearing when her body was found on the side of the road. Together, these three findings, the blood, the shell casing, and the sandal, formed a chain that physically tied Smith's car directly to the location and circumstances of the murder, without having to rely solely on testimony or video. A search of the home Smith shared with Dishaye turned up multiple firearms. How many and of what type isn't specified in the open case materials, but the simple fact that a man with no legitimate source of income and a history of legal trouble had not one but several guns in the house adds another troubling layer to the overall picture. Neither who each weapon belonged to nor how Smith acquired them was ever made public. For someone with a criminal record, simply possessing a firearm can in some cases be a separate violation of the law entirely, regardless of which of these guns, if any, was actually used the night of the murder. Surveillance footage from the Pleasant Village apartments complex became a separate pillar of the evidence in this case. For investigators, footage like that is often even more valuable than witness testimony. Film doesn't get the sequence of events wrong, and it isn't subject to the doubts that come with relying on someone's memory. Combined with the handprint on the driver's side window that Dishaye's cousin Anita had spotted, the camera footage built a consistent, physically backed timeline of the last evening of Dishaye's life, a timeline investigators didn't have to reconstruct from words alone. Based on the evidence gathered, Michael Smith was charged with murder, a first-degree felony under Texas law, meaning prosecutors believed the act was intentional and deliberate, not something committed in a moment of passion or through carelessness. He was booked into the Dallas County Jail, where bond was set at $1 million, an amount that, in practical terms, ruled out any chance of him getting out before trial. For a man who, according to the victim's family, hadn't had a steady source of income in years and depended entirely on his wife's earnings, a bond that size wasn't just high, it was by design completely out of reach. The case was logged under case number 1-90527/2023, and Dallas police formally classified what happened as an act of domestic violence, an official acknowledgement that this wasn't a killing by a stranger, but by a close family member inside a domestic relationship. What happened next, after the charge was filed and Smith was taken into custody, is a question the open sources answer far less thoroughly than the questions around the arrest or the crime itself. No trial date, no judge's name, no prosecution or defense attorneys, no record of the proceedings themselves show up anywhere in the publicly available materials on this case. For a case that drew this much attention at the arrest stage, local TV interviews, coverage from outlets focused on violence against black women, that gap around a later legal process is striking. It leaves the impression that press and public attention landed almost entirely on the moment of arrest, the SWAT footage outside the house, the barbershop video, while the far less dramatic, much slower court process went by with almost no coverage at all. The only indication of a possible outcome comes from a post made by Dishaye's own family on social media, which read, "Justice has been served with a 55-year sentence in the murder case." If that number is accurate, it would mean Michael Smith, who was 39 at the time of his arrest, would effectively spend the rest of his life behind bars. Release, if the terms of a sentence like that even allow for it, would come at an age most people would already consider elderly. But no official document, court record, press release from the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, or any other independent confirmation of that number turned up, either in the materials behind this investigation or in additional searches of open sources. Why the outcome of a case that started with this much public attention didn't get anywhere near the same coverage at sentencing is a question that can only be guessed at. It's possible the case was resolved through a closed process, without a jury and without public hearings, something that happens fairly often when there's a substantial amount of direct evidence and a defendant enters a guilty plea. If that's what happened, the final plea agreement may simply never have made it into public news coverage, which tends to chase high-profile flashpoints rather than routine court outcomes. The wording of the charge matters on its own. Murder, as a first-degree felony, is the most serious category available for a case like this, and pursuing it implies prosecutors believe they had grounds to describe the act as deliberate, not as a spontaneous outburst. They could have pursued a lesser charge, manslaughter for instance, if the circumstances had pointed towards sudden passion or a lack of intent. That they went with murder instead suggests that the evidence gathered by that point, the drive to an isolated spot by the cemetery, a single precise shot fired at close range, no attempt whatsoever to help her, was enough, in investigators' eyes, to call this a conscious, targeted act, not a tragic set of circumstances that spiraled out of control. Saying goodbye to Dishaye stretched across several days and several services, each one drawing together people who'd known her in different roles. As a daughter, a sister, a mother, an entrepreneur, and a member of the church where she'd found her faith as a teenager. The visitation was held on Friday, November 3rd, 2023, from 6 to 7 in the evening, Central Time, at Golden Gate Funeral Home, 4155 South RL, Thornton Freeway in Dallas. The next day, Saturday, November 4th, at 1 p.m., the funeral service was held at Cornerstone Baptist Church, 1819 Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, a service that, by all appearances, drew a substantial crowd of people for whom Dishaye wasn't an abstract victim from a news report, but someone they talked to, worked with, prayed alongside, or simply known personally. The burial took place that same day at Lincoln Memorial Park, 8100 Fireside Drive. This is the same cemetery Michael drove toward just before the shooting on the night of the murder. Dishaye was laid to rest just steps from the place where her life ended. The location her husband chose the night before for a final conversation became within days the official place where she'd rest, somewhere her family could come back to for years afterward. Whether that's a coincidence or not is impossible to say, but the symbolic weight of that closeness likely wasn't lost on the family standing at her fresh grave. After the funeral, caring for the people who depended on Dishaye while she was alive fell to the relatives left behind. Her daughter, Jemiah, and her mother, Jeanette Stevenson, partially paralyzed after her stroke, were left without the person who'd supported them for years, financially, physically, and emotionally. That weight was taken up by Dishaye's brother, Jeremiah, her sisters Jasmine and Gavanna Rosebud, her goddaughter Callie Floyd, her stepfather Timothy Hall, and a wider circle of relatives, a nephew, 7 nieces, and 8 cousins. Jasmine Stevenson became the main voice of the family in public. She's the one who sat down with Dallas TV stations, and her words are the ones quoted most often in coverage of this case. "I just don't understand. I just want to know why. Why would you take my sister from us? Like why?" she said, and there was no rhetorical flourish in that question. Just the raw, unresolved grief of someone who can't find any logic in what happened. She was also the one who insisted on just how loyal her sister had been. She never abandoned her niece, under any circumstances, and she never abandoned her mom, under any circumstances. And remembering Dishaye's marriage, Jasmine said Dishaye did everything in her power to show him that she loved him, no matter what. None of that is an attempt to justify her sister's decision to stay in a relationship that ultimately cost her life. It's a simple effort to protect the memory of someone who, in the eyes of the person closest to her, bore no responsibility for what happened to her. Their cousin Anita, whose sharp eye helped the family pick up Dishaye's trail on the night she went missing, offered her own way of making sense of what happened. I saw a big handprint on the driver's side window. I'm a criminal justice major, so I started looking for context clues, she said, describing that night. But maybe her most important words weren't aimed at reporters at all. They were aimed straight at other women who might recognize their own situation in Dishaye's story. Just get away, get out of the situation. I don't wish this on anybody, nobody. The case was covered by Dallas's major local TV stations, WFAA and Fox 4, along with a number of national and specialty outlets, including Law and Crime, the Dallas Morning News, and platforms like Black Girl Tragic and Shine My Crown, which focus on issues affecting black women specifically. A large share of the coverage was built around interviews with Jasmine. Her words and her grief became, for most of these outlets, the primary way of telling Dishaye's story to a wider audience. Beyond traditional media, the case took on a life of its own online. On TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, Dishaye Stevenson's story got discussed as an example of domestic violence inside the black community.
Carisha's single and Sid Diddy, he okay with it. No shade with it, no shade.
One piece that circulated in that context cited reporting from The Guardian, which found that 4 black women and girls are killed every day in the United States. One family's private tragedy in Dallas got folded into a much larger, much more troubling statistical picture, one where Dishaye's story stops being an isolated case and becomes one of many similar stories repeating across the country. Social media users discussing the case kept coming back to the same detail, again and again, that Dishaye was exactly the person in the relationship who gave, who provided, who kept believing. And based on the discussions, that detail seemed to resonate with a lot of viewers and readers, whether from their own experience or from someone close to them. This case leaves behind more questions than any official file would ever be willing to admit. What is known for certain, without any doubt, is this: a woman who spent years giving away everything she had, money, time, patience, faith in another person, got nothing back except death at the hands of that very same person. A daughter was left without her mother. A mother who needed constant care was left without her only support. Family and community continue to remember Dishaye not as a statistic, but as somebody they loved. And that pain is going to stay with them for good. And if the story in this video made you think about your own circle, if it brought back a conversation, a look, something left unsaid that felt unimportant at the time, maybe it's worth asking yourself, have you ever seen red flags like these in the relationships of people close to you?
See, you got too comfortable. And you think don't nobody want her, you the only one that want her, no matter how you treat her.
People who never quite worked up the nerve to break the silence themselves.